My latest book is my first work of nonfiction. As you know, my first book was Mediocre but Arrogant, and then the second one, which was the sequel, was called Married but Available. I decided to experiment with my third book, which was, about the whole process of hiring. So, as an HR person, I've seen this process happening for many years at very close quarters. And having looked at the whole process of hiring, right from entry level people right up to the CEOs, I just thought that it really was quite interesting to know that it's the most widely used HR process, and it's probably the one which most people don't get right. And the reason why they don't get it right is because we have a lot of myths around the process of hiring. We tend to hire based on what appears in the resume. So what are the qualifications? Where are the, what are the kind of companies the person has worked for? And both of them give you some very baseline information which is quite irrelevant when you start working with a person. So, for example, if you want to hire a lawyer and you hire someone who sort of got the best credentials, there is no way that you can predict whether this person is going to be diligent, which means if you give this person a thick judgment set of papers that the person has to go through, how do you know the person will read all of it, or will just glance through and and maybe miss out the most relevant point that could work in your favor? So now that is really the whole issue of personality, and I think that the piece that works the most and that really one should be worried about is personality, and that's something that most people don't know how to assess. Is the person going to be confident? There's no way to assess that, and there's no way to train for that. So I think as a process of hiring, I think the most important lesson one should learn is that if there is something that is difficult to train, takes a very long time to develop, then that is something that you must assess. And at least you take an informed decision. You may still decide to hire the person, but now you know that if this person is going to find it difficult to do a certain kind of work, you can either support the person with another, colleague or with an assistant. But most of the times, if you take a decision and you discover it suddenly, you are unprepared. And there are many estimates of how much it costs, to make the wrong hire. And the estimates range anywhere from, 15 months salary to, all kinds of numbers, 7 times the salary. I just read in some particular site, if you take the cost of training, development, the investment, all of that, at a senior level, it's almost 7 times. So, regardless of what that number is, I think it's a very expensive process. So, how do we get it right? That's what the book explored. I've worked now in different kinds of industries. I'm now part of Wipro as the Chief Learning Officer. Before that, I worked with Microsoft, Pepsi, Colgate. I worked with them in India, Malaysia, and US. Had an opportunity to work in an ad agency as a HR person, worked in Tata Steel. So different sectors that I worked in. And then I also had the opportunity to specialize in HR. When I was a student, I did my master's in human resources. I taught human resources for about 5 years at XLRA as well. So all of it gave me a good perspective in terms of, what is this whole mystery about hiring right. And in order to start understanding this a little more, I looked at people who are working in different sectors. I talked to people who are in hotels, who hire pilots, who hire front desk staff, all kinds of professions. I had an opportunity to understand what makes them successful and how do they assess the right kind of a person. And we also, the other thing that struck me when I was looking at this is that we have a certain set of myths around hiring, one of which is that there are some traits which are universally desirable. For example, we think being creative is a universally desirable trait, which means regardless of the job, we would say this person is extremely creative, is highly social, it's a great asset. And in some jobs, it really isn't an asset. It can be a disaster. For example, a person who gets bored with routine should never be a surgeon, because surgery is about following a checklist, and doing that repeatedly time and again until you become better and better and better at it. Now, if you get a person who's extremely creative, the person would be a disaster as a surgeon. So, all these horror stories that we know of, that, we left behind a pair of scissors inside the patient, that's the result of bad hiring. The person shouldn't have become a surgeon in the first place, and the person shouldn't have gotten hired as a surgeon in the first place either. So these are some of the myths that I discovered. It does. I sort of looked at, the first step one, I think, which is where the organizations need to spend a lot of time, and which is what we don't spend any time, is to actually create what is called a success profile. And that is about identifying what are the qualifications that you really need. I mean, do you really need someone to have a master's degree or a PhD? What's the difference that we would expect between these two? Someone with a master's degree or an undergrad degree or a PhD. How would that change the knowledge that would be required on the job? Or to look at, what is the kind of experience? We see these kind of questions, that somebody should have 12 years of experience. Why 12? Why not 13? Why not 11? And once you start to look at that, you will discover most of the times people will articulate and say, well, you need to have done this 3 or 4 times over. In each one, if each cycle takes 3 years, then that explains the 12 years. So then you're better off looking for someone who has had 4 completed cycles of that work, rather than look for somebody blindly with 12 years. So there's a little bit of fine tuning in that. And you look at competencies. And then most importantly, identify the 1 or 2 personality traits that actually make someone successful in that job. You look at 2 kinds of fit: the ability to do the job and the ability to fit into the organization culture, the kind of place where the role will be performed. A fit with these 2 is really what makes a person successful. We tend to look at the process of choosing careers based on what is it that the person can learn and what is it that the person can do. We miss the most important piece, which is what does a person enjoy doing? Because if you don't enjoy doing something, there is no way you will ever be good at it. Because, there is enough and more research which talks about, the simple things in popular literature about the 10,000 hours, that you need to have spent 10,000 hours at something in order to become really good at it. If you translate that and imagine yourself doing something that you really dislike, or something that you are lukewarm towards, and doing that for 10,000 hours is going to take you much longer, because instead of spending, let's say, 8 hours a day, you'll probably spend half an hour a day on that. So it will take you that many more years, and you will never be as good as you need to be. So the process of choosing a career has to be about what you enjoy doing rather than what you can do. So, a great example of that is, I hate cooking. I'm a reasonable good cook, but I would never do it voluntarily if I could help it. So, which basically means that everything that one is qualified to do, and this is, I'm taking an example where it really, when you choose careers based on the same principle, it could be a disaster. So there are tons and tons of people who have degrees in, engineering, medicine, and who are now, some of them are breaking out and pursuing something else they really like to do, which is better because they are really outstanding at that. I know of musicians who have trained to be doctors and who are now earning a living as very successful musicians. They would have probably been an average doctor. So if you're looking at excellence, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? And what someone will pay you to do? The intersection of these 3 is where your career should be. I'm equally passionate about both, and I think one feeds off the other. The experiences as an HR person, you actually get a chance to see people's lives very closely, and you talk to a very large cross section of people, which is great material for writing. And then when you look at the whole process of writing, you also sort of then you're writing about something which is based in reality. There's a fictionalized version of that, but then it gives you so many different perspectives. You are not limited by just your own perspective of looking at the world. So I think it really works in my favor that I'm in a profession which lets me do that. Uh, but on the other hand, I also think that one needs to work equally hard at both of them. In terms of writing as well as HR. I've been doing HR, over the last couple of years, and I need to put an equal amount of time, I guess, in writing in order to be, at least possibly good at it. So that's really how I want to chase my dream. But when I do anything, I try to bring in my other interests into my work as well. So, for example, I'm lucky. I am in a kind of a role which gives me a chance to do all the things that I enjoy. It gives me a chance to write. Actually, formally, it's part of what I do. It gives me a chance to connect with people. It gives me a chance to travel. It gives me a chance to pursue photography, to do painting, all of which. So instead of creating slides which are just the usual PowerPoint text and stuff, I use my photographs and paintings and cartoons in my slides. So I sort of bring all of that into my work. So it keeps me energized, and I don't miss out on chasing one at the cost of the other. And no, I just think that, for me, the ability to pursue my writing even through my website or on social media, each of these is an opportunity to sharpen my own skills at writing. So I think when I use Twitter and, to write something in 140 characters, requires a very different skill in writing. Or when I do the blog, either for my website or for some of the other newspapers that I write for, then they have a certain kind of a readership, a different format. So it just continuously challenges you to write for different kinds of audience. And that's something that I feel, is something that I actively pursue, because that's one of the ways in which I could become better. Some people are naturally gifted, but I think if I'm not that gifted, then I at least need to work that much harder towards that. So that's how I like to pursue what I write. Yes, I mean, I just thought that after I've finished writing, a piece of non-fiction, I should come back and write another piece of fiction, because there's a story which has been brewing for a while. I did a draft about 2 years back. I wasn't happy with it. I'm going to rework that entire thing, and so it is really a plot around, there's a murder, and then there's stuff around medical malpractices, and it's all of that put together. So it just makes for a rich concoction. So that's really what I'm working on now.